In this video, I'm going to use our first data set to walk you guys through our bar plot making, specifically building up to the multivariate bar plots, which involve when you have three categorical variables and you want to examine the relationship across all three. As we do with each of our projects, we start by creating a new data sheet. Always a good idea, building regressions, building pictures. The way Excel is kind of finicky, it can be useful to move over just the data you're working with. And always get the habit of bringing the identifier for the data. So in this case, it's state. Eventually, when we have multiple years, it'll be state and year. So at this point, I need three categorical variables to examine. So I'm going to bring across state. I'm going to bring population category. I'm going to bring manufacturing category, and the no income tax dummy variable, which is a categorical variable despite being coded 0 and 1. 0 in this case meaning it has an income tax, and 1 meaning it does not. As we have done in class and other times, creating a bar plot means creating a pivot table. I am going to highlight columns B, C, and D, which is where the data is that I want to play with in a pivot table. I'm going to select Insert, and I'm going to create a pivot table. Since I've already highlighted my data, it is visible here in the Select a Table or Range field. You got to tell it where to put it. So in this case, I'm going to put the pivot table right next to the data that I'm working with. I hit OK, and it takes me to the pivot table builder. We're going to start very easy here. I just want to get a count for the different levels of manufacturing category in the data set. I'm going to put manufacturing category both in the rows field and in the values field. It will automatically give you a count. There are other descriptive statistics built into Excel, but for our purposes, we're counting the levels of manufacturing category. And here we can see the start to our pivot table. First thing I like to do is clean this up a bit, because the pivot table is exactly how the bar plot is going to look. So the first thing I will do is remove the blank option from the row labels. I'm just not interested in if we had any missing data. We don't for this variable, but in case we did. Also, this pivot table is going to output bars that go from high to low to medium, which doesn't make a lot of sense. If I right-click on the high label, I can move it to the end of the list. So right-click on high, move high to end, and now we have a table that goes low, medium, high. And it'll then make the bars low, medium, high from left to right. Remember, the reason these three groups are basically the same size is because we created these categories using the percentiles. If I were to want to make a bar plot with just this, a univariate bar plot, I would, because my cursor is on the pivot table, I would go to Insert, the bar plots, and just pick the first one. And there you have your univariate bar plot. To go to a bivariate bar plot, we need a pivot table that is what we refer to as a crosstab, or a cross tabulation. In that case, I'm going to drag the income tax variable to the columns. So here we now see a table with the levels of manufacturing as rows and the income tax dummy as columns. Now 0 and 1, not very intuitive. The nice thing about a pivot table is you can rename both of them right here. We know that 0 means the state has an income tax, and a 1 means they have no income tax. I can then resize this column so I can see the label. And now I have a pivot table, very nicely, that cross-tabulates manufacturing level with income tax. I don't like that there's a blank here. I would like that to be a 0. If I right-click and go to the pivot table options, you'll see there's a checkbox next to 4 empty cells show. I can plug in a 0 here, and when I hit OK, it fills in that 0, which is nice. Okay, so same thing as we did last time. As long as my cursor is on that pivot table, I can insert a bar plot, and now I have a side-by-side bar plot, which I could also change, right? In this case, side by side, or I could insert a stacked bar plot with the option next to it. Right? So there is a stacked bar plot broken out by income tax. So that gets us to the bivariate bar plot, or a bar plot with two categorical variables. Our third thing is we would like to be able to examine these bar plotted relationships, categorical, bicategorical, for subsets of the data by a third categorical variable. One option to do that would be to take this third variable and also put it in the columns. Unfortunately, you can see this creates nested columns. This is just hard to read, right? So now within the income tax versus no income tax, there are 3 levels of population category. That's not great. Instead, I'm going to drag population category to the filters. This gives us back our nice clean table of manufacturing by income tax, but it also gives us a filtering feature where I can specify which population category I'm interested in. So I could say remake this table, but only for states that are large populations. Or we could do it again, but only for states that are small in population size. Now, one problem here is Excel is trying to help us. There is a row here, in this case, high, that has no data, so it gets rid of it. I actually think this messes up our bar plots because it means there's not even a space on the bar plot x-axis for where that bar would go. It makes it a little harder to compare different subsets. So what you can do, this is not at all intuitive, is right-click on the row labels and select field settings. So before, to get a 0 in the blank spot, we used the pivot table options. This time you have to use field settings. In the field settings, select layout and print, and then check the box for show items with no data. This means now, as we switch between the different levels of population category as our filter, we get to keep any row that has zeros in it. So now we can insert a bar plot, just as we did before. Why don't we do a stacked bar plot? But in this case, I can now use the pop category filter on the chart to look at only big states, or medium states, or small states. What I would suggest is you then clean up your bar plot, polish it up, give it a title that's useful, sourcing information, make sure the axis, the y-axis is labeled, and then you can save the filtered chart to a Word doc or whatever you're building your report in. Then you can change the population category again, export that one, or save the image, paste it into your Word doc, and on and on. And that's how we build our multivariate bar plots.